On June 5th, 2015, YouTube channel The Know posted a video with several leaked screenshots, concept art, and gameplay details for Dark Souls 3. The formal debut of Dark Souls 3 came soon after, with the trailer released at E3 2015. The trailer features ruined kingdoms blanketed in ash as pilgrims wander through the wastes. A woman places a crown upon her head, and a giant rises from the grave, covered in embers. Miyazaki returned to direct Dark Souls 3, but development began before he joined the team. In an interview with IGN, Miyazaki stated, "The president asked me to get on the Dark Souls 3 project, for which the prototyping was hitting some speed bumps. This suggestion came to Miyazaki as he was still working on Bloodborne. Despite all the work already on his schedule, he accepted. I was reminiscing of the things I could have done in Dark Souls that weren't possible in Bloodborne, and was reminded of the beauty of fantasy. It was the perfect time to return to Dark Souls and inject some new ideas." While Miyazaki was asked to join the directing duties of Dark Souls 3, he was not alone. Alongside him was co-director Isamu Okano, who also directed Steel Battalion: Heavy Armor. Dark Souls 3 was released in Japan on March 24, 2016, coming to the rest of the world on April 12th. Fans and critics alike praised its more speedy and tight combat, although it did receive some backlash for its inconsistent frame rate. The Dark Souls series is very much about the cycle of fire and dark. In the original Dark Souls, Lord Gwyn extended the Age of Fire by offering himself to the flame. In Dark Souls 2, we discover that the world runs in cycles and is unable to move on from light or dark. Dark Souls 3 is about breaking that cycle. Dark Souls 3 is set after the events of the first two games. The world is in a cataclysmic state as the fire is fading and the dark is quickly approaching. The game takes place in Lothric, a powerful kingdom whose prince was destined to link the flame. However, he abandoned his duty and waited for the fire to fade. When the linking of the fire is threatened, a bell tolls, awakening the Lords of Cinder, beings that linked the flame in the past. However, this time, the resurrected lords refused, and instead returned to their domains. Three lords arose from their graves. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, was once a devout cleric that acquired a habit of devouring human flesh. The Abyss Watchers are a caravan of undead, sworn by wolf's blood to contain the abyss. And Yorm is a giant who is asked to lead a once subjugated people, serving as both a weighty blade and a stone-hard shield. The game begins with the player rising from their grave. Unlike Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, the player is not strictly undead. They are now unkindled ash, who are former undead that set out to link the fire but failed. However, being unkindled ash functions essentially the same. When in an embered state, the player glows with red flames and embers upon them. When killed, the player's flames are extinguished and their maximum health is reduced. This embered form can be reinstated with the use of the Ember item, which is the game's version of humanity and human effigies. After defeating the tutorial boss Eudix Gundyr, the player arrives at Firelink Shrine, which serves as the hub of the game. Unlike the first Dark Souls, the Firelink Shrine is a huge stone structure with ill-lit hallways and a massive throne room. It has a few residents at the start of the game, like Hawkwood and the Shrine Maiden, but like Dark Souls 2, more inhabitants will make their way there, depending on the choices the player makes on their journey. The paramount character here is the Firekeeper, who serves as the player's guide, similar to the Maiden in Black and the Emerald Herald. She informs the player that the Lords of Cinder must be returned to their thrones in order to link the fire once more. She then has the player place a coiled sword in the bonfire and head to the high wall of Lothric. The player must also return to the Firekeeper each time they wish to level up. Thankfully, warping between bonfires is unlocked from the start, so it's easy to get from one location to the next. New to Dark Souls 3 are weapon arts, special attacks or abilities tied to specific weapons and spells. There are a wide range of weapon arts, like a powerful upswing, a black flame buff, or a boost in damage to spells. They're a nice addition to the series that adds an extra layer of depth and complexity to combat. Casting a weapon art requires focus points, which replaces mana from other games. Similar to Estus flasks, which refill health, there are Ashen Estus flasks to refill focus points, but players have to manage their inventory carefully, as they can only carry a certain number of flasks at a time. The level design of Dark Souls 3 takes most of its inspiration from the original Dark Souls. Areas are once again tightly packed with multiple routes and layers to explore, while also connecting to each other in a seamless and believable manner. However, it does take some ideas from Dark Souls 2, like having multiple shortcuts within larger regions, rather than shortcuts leading to completely new areas. Most importantly, Dark Souls 3 gives a great sense of satisfaction from exploration. Significant areas like the Untended Graves and Archdragon Peak can only be discovered through experimentation and perception. For instance, to reach Archdragon Peak, the player must learn the Path of the Dragon gesture from a corpse, then use this gesture at a specific location in Irithyll Dungeon.
If you've any sense, you go find a coffin to huddle up inside.
Although Dark Souls 2 is technically a sequel, it often feels disconnected and separate from the story and world of the original. Dark Souls 3 addresses this and acts like more of a traditional sequel. Old faces return like Andre the Blacksmith and the sly and mischievous Patches. Memorable areas are also revisited, like the demon-infested Lost Izalith and the City of the Gods and Orlando. And long unanswered questions, like the identity of Gwyn's firstborn, are finally answered. Covenants are once again a big part of Dark Souls 3, and the player can switch between them on the fly by equipping related items like in Bloodborne. Some familiar covenants make a return, like the Blue Sentinels and Warriors of Sunlight, but there are also brand new covenants like the Mound Makers, who are able to attack friend and foe alike. Once again, the characters are deep and memorable thanks to their intriguing stories and dialogue. Siegward is a jolly and clumsy knight who carries the heavy burden of killing his old friend, Yorm the Giant. Meanwhile, Yuria is a mysterious hollow from the city of Londor who wishes to usher in a dark age.
The next time we cross paths, one may find the other in a time of need.
However, Anri and Horace's story may be the most involved. As children, Anri and Horace were captives of Aldrich, along with several others. All the children were eventually devoured by Aldrich, except Anri and Horace, who managed to escape from his grasp. When Aldrich was resurrected as a Lord of Cinder, they both swore to kill him in an act of revenge for their fallen friends. Along their quest, Anri and Horace become separated and lost. Horace hollows deep within Smoldering Lake, while Anri searches for him in the catacombs. Depending upon the player's actions, Anri can be killed by the hollowed Horace, or Anri can continue on their journey to Irithyll alone. Once again, depending on the player's actions, there are two fates for Anri. One possibility is for Anri to complete their quest of slaying Aldrich, hollowing shortly after. The other is to become the player's betrothed for the Dark Lord ending. After defeating the three Lords of Cinder, the player is warped to the once mighty Lothric Castle, which is now in shambles. Decapitated corpses and foul creatures litter its halls, and dragons guard its passageways. Even once proud members of the royal family are shadows of their former selves, particularly Lothric's once mighty king, Osiris. After battling their way through several areas within the castle, like the Grand Archives, the player arrives at the throne room, confronting Prince Lothric in order to make him a Lord of Cinder. Prince Lothric refuses and calls the act of linking the flame a curse. After defeating Lothric and his brother Prince Lorien, the player returns to Firelink Shrine and places all of the skulls of all the Lords of Cinder upon their thrones. Doing so opens the passage to the Kiln of the First Flame, where the player faces off with the final boss of the game, the Soul of Cinder. An amalgamation of all the previous Lords of Cinder throughout time, the Soul of Cinder will take on each of their fighting styles, culminating with Lord Gwyn's. Afterwards, there are 4 different endings the player can receive. They can link the fire and let the cycle repeat itself. They can let the world fade into darkness. They can choose to betray the Firekeeper and take the flame for themselves. Or they can become the Lord of Hollows. After the credits, the player is given the option to move on to New Game Plus or remain in their current game. However, unlike Dark Souls 2, there are no new items or enemies in New Game Plus.
Please bear witness to our resolve. Fire for Ariandel. Fire for Ariandel. And the ash to kindle flame.
On August 24, 2016, Bandai Namco announced that the first DLC for Dark Souls 3, Ashes of Ariandel, would be available on October 25th. A season pass was also introduced that included both DLCs, the second of which would be later announced as the Ringed City. The first DLC takes place within the painting of Ariandel. In the Cathedral of the Deep, the player meets Gale, a former slave knight. Gale is searching for a being of unkindled ash who can show flame to the lady he serves in order to burn the rot away from their world. After accepting the knight's request, the player touches a scrap of the painting and is dragged into Ariandel. Unlike those on the outside that wish to prolong their world, Ariandel's inhabitants wish to burn everything away and begin anew. Then, Frida came. Frida was once the leader of the Sable Church of Londor, but she eventually came here, taking a seat of power and earning the trust of Father Ariandel. Now, she refuses to let it burn. In order to protect the world of Ariandel, Frida locked up a powerful young painter who posed a threat to her reign. At the end of the DLC, the player can speak to this girl, and she tells them that Uncle Gale has gone off to find the Dark Soul, so that she may paint a new world. The Painted World is a cold and rotting land where forlorn souls gather to seek shelter. The snow-covered landscape gives off a tranquil feeling. It's filled with several broad areas where beasts and men roam. There's a huge frozen wasteland with several paths to explore and shortcuts to unlock. It may seem a bit short, but it still leaves a feeling of great satisfaction, thanks in part to its final boss, which is one of the most shocking and memorable in all of Dark Souls 3.
Yes, yes, of course. I know thy one. The Dark Soul, is it not? Why else was one deigned to visit this dung heap?
On March 28, 2017, the second and final DLC was released. The Ringed City takes players to Londor, an ancient city of hollows. Long ago, Londor was walled off from the rest of the world, for Lord Gwyn feared the Pygmies and the Dark Soul, leaving his youngest daughter, Princess Filianor, locked in an endless slumber to guard it. In the end, Gale finds the Pygmy Lords and kills them. He attempts to take the blood of the Dark Soul for the younger painter in Ariandel, but Gale is instead corrupted by its power and meets a tragic end at the hands of the player. The Ringed City feels like a fitting end to the series. Although it would have been nice for it to have a bit more closure in the form of a final cutscene, it ties into the mythos nicely and features some excellent level design thanks to its scope and the secrets hidden throughout. There are also some truly fascinating and disgusting enemies, as well as some formidable boss encounters. A new arena was also added where players could battle each other in several different maps. When both of the DLCs have been completed, the player can return to the painting girl and give her the blood of the Dark Soul. With it, she begins to paint a new world.
One day, it will make someone a goodly hope.
In a GameSpot interview in November of 2015, before the release of Dark Souls 3, Miyazaki stated that he was ready to close the book on Dark Souls, as he thought it would be critical to the future of From Software. When asked if he had any fears of oversaturation for the franchise, he stated, "It'd be a lie if I said I have no concerns about that. I don't think it'd be the right choice to continue indefinitely creating Souls and Bloodborne games. I'm considering Dark Souls 3 to be the big closure on the series. That's not just limited to me, but From Software and myself together want to aggressively make new things in the future. Dark Souls 3 will mark the last game where the development project began before I became president. The next title will be a game that was conceived while I was president. I believe that From Software has to create new things. There will be new types of games coming from us, and Dark Souls 3 is an important marker in the evolution of From Software." Nearly a year later, at the 2016 Tokyo Game Show, Miyazaki reiterated this sentiment while speaking with Polygon. It's time to move away from the Dark Souls franchise. As president of From Software, I'm not completely denying the possibility of bringing back the franchise in the future. There could be someone else in my company who wants to work on new installments. But we believe that the series will end after the 2 DLC.
The poor wretched souls, be they lord or legend, the curse shows no mercy.
Dark Souls 3 is the final chapter in the saga as we know it. It takes the best elements from all previous Souls games and creates something truly worthy for the end of this legendary series. And even though the fire fades for now, the dark is not necessarily the end. The Souls series began its journey 9 years ago. Thanks to Hidetaka Miyazaki and his team's passion for gaming, players all around the world have fallen in love with their stories, gameplay, and design philosophies. It's unclear what's next on the horizon from this talented developer, but it's safe to assume that whatever it is, From Software and Miyazaki will continue to surprise us. The Souls Retrospective was made possible by the tremendous support of our patrons. To learn more about Easy Allies and how you can get involved, head to patreon.com/easyallies. Any amount will help us to produce more retrospectives and further our goals.